Luis Donaldo Colosio was a politician and economist from Mexico. He rose to prominence in Mexican politics as President Carlos Salinas de Gortari's protégé and hand-picked successor. Their close political ties began when Colosio worked for the Ministry of Budget and Planning as a member of the Institutional Revolutionary Party. In today's video, we're going to be sharing with you the rise and tragic end of Luis Donaldo Colosio. So, stay tuned to the end of the video. And without any further ado, let's dive right in. Luis Colosio Fernandez and Ofelia Murrieta Armida Garza had a son named Luis Donaldo Colosio. Colosio was born into a family with a lengthy political history in Magdalena de Quino y Sonora. Colosio earned a bachelor's degree in economics from the Instituto Tecnológico de Estudios Superiores de Monterrey and joined the Institutional Revolutionary Party in 1972. Before returning to Mexico, he pursued a postgraduate degree at the University of Pennsylvania and researched at the International Institute for Applied Systems Analysis in Austria. In 1979, he began working for future President Carlos Salinas de Gortari in the Secretariat of Budgeting and Planning. Mr. Colosio, who had curly hair and an afro at the time, was one of thousands of students outraged by the government's suppression of demonstrators in Mexico City in 1968. He later dismissed the incident as a symptom of being young. Still, in PRI's official biography, he is mentioned saying, "I belong to a generation marked by enormous changes and social movements." He was vowed to Congress in 1985 as the federal deputy for his hometown, and he was named to the PRI's National Executive Committee in 1987. He was chosen as Salinas' campaign manager for the presidential campaign in 1988. Colosio was elected to the Senate to represent Sonora in the same election. However, he may have reached a watershed moment in 1987 when he was elected to the PRI's national office. The following year, he was named to lead PRI, vowing to clean up the electoral system after working on the campaign that delivered Mr. Salinas to the presidency. Mr. Colosio, like Mr. Salinas, aimed to strike a balance between change and the PRI's supremacy, which had been in power since 1929. Accusations were leveled against Mr. Colosio that Mr. Salinas had only won due to vote fraud. In 1991, however, he regained much of this luster by leading the PRI to a landslide victory in legislative elections. Mr. Colosio was appointed Secretary of Social Development by Mr. Salinas in 1992, and as a result, he was assigned to the National Solidarity Program, a massive anti-poverty initiative aimed at mitigating the negative consequences of the government's market-oriented economic measures. His new position also includes responsibility for environmental programs. During last year's push for the North American Free Trade Agreement, he helped persuade U.S. senators that Mexico would enforce environmental rules much more aggressively. Colosio was the chairman of the party's National Executive Committee during the early years of Salinas' administration. Despite his close relationship with him, Mr. Colosio had to compete for the mayorship of Mexico City against Manuel Camacho Solis. The spotlight focused on former Foreign Minister Manuel Camacho's negotiations with the EZLN guerrillas. He was received by big audiences during his presidential campaign, as had all the PRI's prior presidential candidates. Despite the PRI's falling popularity causing some initial skepticism, Colosio gave a controversial but popular speech before the monument to the Mexican Revolution on March 6, 1994, and the anniversary of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, the PRI. He talked about the indigenous communities, government mistreatment, and the people's independence from the government, all of which were hot topics when the Zapatistas were making similar declarations. The speech is largely seen as the turning point in Colosio's relationship with the then-President Salinas. Since Mexico's constitution only allows presidents to serve one term, presidents have traditionally, until Salinas, chosen their successors. The party's first primary election in history was held in 1999. Colosio continued to enjoy the president's favor, expressed in his famous declaration, "No se hagan bolas, el candidato el Colosio," which translates to, "Don't get confused, Colosio is the candidate," which would be an appropriate translation. Literally, it means, "Don't entangle yourselves, Colosio is the candidate." In accepting the nomination, he said, "Wide-ranging social reform is Mexico's challenge for the rest of the century." When insurgents in the South sought such reform, he appeared unclear of how to respond. Mr. Camacho, who was appointed as the government's negotiator with the rebels, rapidly became the center of attention. Salinas' announcement was prompted by persistent reports that Colosio, who was struggling with his campaign, would be replaced by highly recognizable Camacho. Camacho let rumors fester for a while before announcing that he would not run for office, instead of focusing on the Chiapas rebellion. Colosio was assassinated the day after Camacho's statement. Colosio was shot in the head with a .38 special reportedly acquired in San Francisco at a campaign event in Lomas Taurinas, an impoverished neighborhood of Tijuana, Baja California, at 5:05 p.m. on March 23, 1994. After arrangements to fly Colosio to an American hospital across the border were postponed, he collapsed and was brought to the city's major hospital. His death was revealed a few hours later amid a slew of contradictory eyewitness accounts that have persisted till today. Mario Alberto Martinez, the gunman, was apprehended at the scene and maintained his statement that he acted alone. Despite this, the various ideas continue to circulate about Colosio's assassination. The authorities were chastised for their handling of Alberto, who had been shaved, showered, and given a prison haircut before being shown to the public, sparkling speculation over whether the man who looked so different from the one that was caught was the murderer. Colosio was shot 3 times, and it was never determined whether a single person fired them. The case was technically resolved after many different prosecutors investigated it, but the debate lingers due to numerous mishandlings of the investigation and contradictory versions. Alberto is still being held at the La Palma High Security Jail in Almoloya de Juarez. The assassination has sparked many conspiracy theories, including that narco-traffickers carried it out. However, the most widely held belief among Mexicans is that his party betrayed him, and the assassination was orchestrated by high-ranking PRI officials, including President Salinas, because Colosio's speech strayed from Salinas' political agenda to maintain power during future Mexican administrations. Salinas suddenly stopped a meeting with Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien shortly after Colosio was slain, publicly denouncing the slaying as an act of infamy. Diana Laura Riojas, Colosio's wife, died on November 18, 1994, while researching her husband's murder. She died of pancreatic cancer. With only 4 months until the election, the PRI was hampered by the constitutional requirement that no presidential candidate hold public office for the 6 months preceding the election. What this did is effectively disqualify the entire cabinet, which contained the majority of more promising replacements. Because Manlio Fabio Beltrones, a close associate of the slain candidate, provided a video in which Colosio praised Zedillo, Salinas eventually chose Ernesto Zedillo. He had recently resigned as education minister to serve as Colosio's campaign manager. This was a lucky break for Zedillo, who would never have been a contender under normal conditions, which sparked even more rumors, whether true or false. A few months later, Salinas' brother-in-law, PRI President José Francisco Ruiz Massieu, was assassinated in broad daylight in Mexico City, putting an end to PRI's 2 most visible and powerful official leaders in Mexico, Colosio and Ruiz Massieu. Ernesto Zedillo was eventually elected president. Laura Riojas, Colosio's wife, died of cancer 8 months after he was assassinated. Colosio's widow's first words after learning of her husband's assassination, according to the news magazine Procheco, were, "Who did it?" 2 children who are currently in the care of relatives have survived. Colosio's father remained committed to uncovering what he believed to be hidden truths surrounding the son's public murder, and he wrote a book about the case in 2004. And then, in 2010, he passed away. Luis Donaldo Colosio Riojas has said that he pardoned the cowards who killed his father during a visit to Lomas Taurinas on February 11th in 2021. He also chastised the political establishment for snatching power to promote their nefarious organizations and interests, and he bemoaned the reality that the leaders' cries for unity and solidarity are gonna go unheeded. And there you have it, the rise and tragic end of Luis Donaldo Colosio. And that'll be it for today's video. Thanks so much for staying tuned. Later, guys.